Item number 6 is to consider adopting 4 resolutions related to the fiscal year 2026 Mesa County budget, and we will adopt each resolution independently, but you're going to present all of them together this morning. And I will read them. 1A, or a resolution to summarize expenditures and revenues for each fund and adopting a 2026 budget. 2, a resolution appropriating sums of money for calendar year 2026. 3, a resolution levying general property tax for the year 2025. And 4, a resolution to adopt authorized staffing levels for the year 2026. Diane Juitkowski.
Good morning, Diane Juitkowski, Budget Manager for Mesa County. Today we have for you our 2026 adopted final budget. And I just want to give an overview of what the budget process has looked like up to this point. Pretty standard process every year. We go through preliminary revenue forecasting and budget preparation in April and May, followed by gathering departmental budgets and budget requests, which are then reviewed by our budget review team and the commissioners. And then we put together the proposed budget, which was presented in October. We then follow that up with an appeals process where departments can appeal to the board for anything that wasn't included in the proposed budget. And then we come up with our final version of the budget, which we're presenting today. And that's going to be based on the proposed budget and any changes that have been made through the appeals process or some of the outstanding items such as grant funding, finalizing property taxes, as well as health insurance premiums and those kind of things. So I will kick it over to Todd to start.
Perfect, thank you. So commissioners, I'd just like to start by thanking our elected officials, our department heads, and our entire budget team for this process. Their collaboration, their stewardship has been amazing as we've worked through this, some of the challenges that we've seen this year. I also want to recognize the extraordinary effort across the organization during the hiring freeze. Department stepped up and maintained essential services despite carrying vacancies, which is really demonstrating the very best of Team Mesa. So, as you're aware, we have developed this budget during a challenging revenue environment with reduced state and federal support, slower than expected growth. Because we began forecasting early, we were able to make informed decisions, reduce expenditures where necessary, and prioritize core and public safety, core services and public safety. Through this disciplined approach, I'm glad to say that we're bringing forward a balanced budget in 2026. So with that, though, I'd like to talk to you a little bit before I turn it over to Diane about the priorities that guided our work. More specifically, the foundation that was created as a result of our strategic plan. And so in June of this year, as Diane had said, talking a little bit about the background, but in June of this year, we approved our strategic plan. This plan guided every decision behind the 2026 budget process. And so our strategic initiatives, building the best team, delivering excellence, and leaning into the future, along with organizational values, shaped our priorities and ensured alignment with our long-term vision. As we talk about building the best team, our employees are the foundation of every service we deliver. This budget strengthens and stabilizes our team through competitive compensation, strategic staffing adjustments, and ongoing professional development. And importantly, with the exception of those who voluntarily participated in the staff reduction program, all staffing reductions were limited to vacant FTEs. This protects our current employees and supports continuity of service in the year ahead. When we talk about delivering excellence, it's what we do and how we deliver it. We remain focused on delivering consistent, high-quality service to our community. And in other words, and what we refer to it often is best in class. For 2026, this includes strengthening our facilities, technology systems, and core infrastructure. The tools our teams and residents rely on every day. This investment directly enhances safety, efficiency, and overall reliability across the county. When we adopted the budget, we added a new strategic initiative this year, and it was leaning into the future. It's how we prepare for tomorrow. And I don't think the timing of that could have been any better. Seeing the challenges that we were faced with this year, the impacts coming down, it's an opportunity for us to plan proactively by advancing long-term capital priorities, leveraging grants and partnerships, and making disciplined financial decisions that support smart, sustainable growth. This approach ensures we can meet the community's evolving needs and remain responsive to emerging challenges, including those occurring at the state and federal level, which this year we saw a lot of. Together, these priorities reinforce our mission, advance our vision, and put our strategic plan into action. They produce meaningful results, continuing excellence in service delivery, strengthening infrastructure, modernizing systems, and reinvesting in both our facilities and our staff. With that, I'll turn it over to Diane to walk through the numbers.
Here I have for you on the screen the complete Mesa County adopted budget. This is including all funds. These are gross figures, so this includes transfers and charges between departments for internal services. So it really is all encompassing of what our budget is for next year. This is comparing the 2026 adopted budget versus the 2025 adopted budget. And we will go over the changes that happen between the proposed and adopted budget in a couple slides. But here you can see in 2026, the adopted budget includes $242.9 million in total revenue. This is a decrease of $7 million versus 2025, which is about 2.8% less versus 2025. And I'll go over kind of what makes up the revenues. So general revenues, property taxes, we're seeing a slight increase in that versus 2025. We're bound by Tabor growth. And so that looks at local growth plus the current inflationary projection. And so that's about 3.9% growth versus 2025. We are doing a $2 million Tabor refund, and we're issuing that via property tax credits. And that is due to an overcollection of revenue in 2024. We will be covering this through our capital fund. So we'll be transferring from the capital fund to the general fund to make up for that Tabor refund. We are not doing checks this year, and the reason for that is just because the Tabor refund is much smaller than in previous year. It makes more sense to do it via property tax that way. For sales tax, this makes up about 30% of our total revenue. The growth in that over the past few years has trended pretty flat. And so we are looking at a very small growth factor in that going into 2026, about 1.5 to 2% growth. And overall, the growth in our general revenue sources is being primarily offset by decrease in intergovernmental revenues that we're expecting for 2026. And I do want to kind of give a little more background on that. The intergovernmental revenues makes up about 35% of our total revenue. It's made up primarily of grants and contracts with the federal, state, and other governments. And these funds are typically designated for a specific program or purpose. And so there are restrictions around what these funds can be used for. And so when we experience decreases in this type of funding, it just means that these programs or initiatives lose their funding, and we really have to decide whether we can support this program through general revenue growth or whether we need to scale back or eliminate programs. And this is kind of similar to the conversation surrounding unfunded mandates. So with that, those are requirements that we have to do as a local government that isn't supported through any additional funding. And so it brings into the conversation during budget, how do we continue to support these initiatives when the funding isn't present? And so this was an exercise in the budget this year, and it's going to be an exercise for future years as well as we deal with the drawback on the revenues. I just want to mention that another channel that we have available to us in 2026 is reviewing our fee structure and seeing if there's potential to create any graduated increases with the fees. to increase those along with inflation and limited Tabor impacts. So we are exploring options to make up for the slow revenue growth or the drawback on the intergovernmental revenue. And again, all these conversations we discussed this year in budget, as well as it'll be a conversation for future budgets as well as we contend with this. And I also want to mention severance tax. We budgeted for about $1 million in severance tax in 2025. The state is going to be retaining that. And so we did pull that out of our 2026 adopted budget in anticipation of not receiving that. And so that's about $1 million that we typically receive there. So again, that's just another example of the drawback on that intergovernmental funding. I also want to mention a difference between the 2 years. In 2025, we received tax-exempt lease purchase financing to fund energy efficiency capital projects across the facilities in Mesa County. And that work was completed in 2025, and so those revenues and expenditures have been pulled out of the 2026 budget. So again, that's just another difference that you're going to see between the 2 years here. Moving on to the expenditure side of things, the 2026 adopted budget includes $273.7 million in total expenditures. That's an increase of 1.1 million, about 0.4% increase versus 2025. And so as Todd mentioned, we do try to prioritize the values and goals laid out in our strategic plan during the budget process. And so not only do we see pressures on the revenue side, we also see pressures from expenditures as well. So inflationary pressures, increase in contracted services, as well as unfunded mandates, all contribute to the rise in expenditures year over year. We had a 10% increase in our health insurance premiums in 2026. And we also try to prioritize allocating resources to invest in providing competitive compensation for our employees. And so due to all these pressures and the revenue outlook, we did try to implement an expenditure reduction effort to reduce departmental budgets by 10%. In addition to that, we ended up defunding a total of 50 FTEs, which I can get into the details on that in a later slide. But these reduction efforts that we went through the budget process allowed us to keep the expenditure growth to a minimum year over year. And as I mentioned, the capital fund, we did pull out those TELP energy efficiency projects. So that's a difference there on the expenditure side as well. And then we do have about $15 million in capital projects that are rolling over from 2025. And I'll also give more details on that when I go over the capital budget here in a couple slides. But are there any questions about the total fund budget before I jump into the general fund?
I guess just to stress the dynamic between the capital fund, a lot of projects didn't get finished last year. Those project revenues don't show up in our 2026 revenue, but just as a fund balance. So it looks like we're going way over budget, but those are revenue balances from one year to the next that got transferred. And so when you're looking at all funds together, it might look like, oh my goodness, you're overspending by $30 million. But those are rollover funds from last year that are going to be expended in 2026.
Definitely. And that's really the biggest drawdown on the fund balance during the year. It's just the nature of the capital fund and those large projects that span multiple years. And sometimes you do roll the extra funds into fund balance and then draw them down in a particular year.
Okay.
So moving on to the general fund, about 33% of the total county budget supports 22 departments and functions, and all of our elected officials operate out of this fund. And so this is where you're going to see the largest impacts to budget. When we talk about the general fund, we talk a lot about fund balance and the importance of keeping a safety net to fund operations in the event that we experience revenue shortfalls. And so we have a really good buildup of fund balance over the past 5 years or so. So if you look at 2025 adopted, the beginning balance of $26.9 million is a very healthy fund balance. And so the buildup of that fund balance is key to getting through the next couple of years in terms of the general fund. As you can see in 2025 and now 2026 as well, we do plan to draw down some of that fund balance in response to the shortfalls in the revenue. And so really the deficit is due to our expenditures are currently outpacing the lack in revenue growth. And so I do want to mention in 2025, you can see here that the ending balance was 18.8 million. We anticipated drawing down about 8 million during the year. 2026 adopted, the beginning balance is almost $1 million higher, and that's because we are currently forecasting a little bit better in terms of drawdown on fund balance, and that is just due to some of the cash saving measures that we are taking, such as a hiring freeze that we had during a portion of this year. And so I do just want to emphasize that this is a balanced budget that we're presenting, and that means that the expenditures that we are appropriating don't exceed the total revenues or fund balance that we have available to us. So starting with the revenues, revenues remain mostly flat year over year, 91.7 million, so only decreasing by about 0.2 million. And again, it's a similar story to what I reviewed for total funds. So property tax, Tabor limited growth, so about 3.9% growth there. Sales tax trending very flat year over year, so about 1.5% growth on that. And then again, the growth in our general revenues are being offset largely by those decreases in intergovernmental revenues. Particularly the severance tax is one that directly goes into the general fund. So when we don't receive that, that is $1 million impact to the general fund. And so on the expenditure side of things, again, expenditures also remain mostly flat year over year, 100.9 million, only increasing by less than $1 million. And so through the budget process, again, just prioritizing those goals in the strategic plan. And due to those preliminary revenue forecasts, as I mentioned, we did the departmental reduction 10% to their budgets. And of the 50 defunded positions, 33 of those were in the general fund. And so some of these reduction efforts did provide us with savings in the general fund. However, it does get offset by some of those anticipated increases. So the increases for contracts, software, inflation, our health insurance, over half of our employees are in the general fund. So when that goes up, half of that impact hits the general fund, as well as when we prioritize compensation for our employees. Again, half of that, the raises goes into the general fund. Are there any questions about the general fund before I move on?
Questions?
I don't have any.
Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you.
So now I'm just going to go over some of the changes in the adopted budget from the proposed budget that we presented in October. And so this is the changes in revenues. And so we did receive our final certification of values, the assessed values from our assessor's office. And so that allowed us to finalize the mill levy calculation and really finalize what our property tax revenue collections were going to look like going into next year. We did have some departments that had some updates to federal and state revenues. Public health saw some additional decreases in revenue, but this was partially offset by a new forecast that we received for HUTF that was coming in higher than anticipated in the proposed budget. In addition, opioid settlement funding has been finalized, so we are adding that here into the adopted budget. And how this works is we serve as a pass-through entity for these funds. So basically we receive the revenues and then we disperse them to various organizations and programs based on a plan that is set by an opioid governance board. And so we really just receive the revenues and immediately disperse those. And so this is where you're seeing the revenue side of things for the opioid piece. And then finally, as we get closer to the end of the year, we finalize our capital fund budget quite a bit and looking at what projects are going to be finishing up in 2025 or also what is going to be rolling over into 2026. So that we had a couple updates on the revenue side of things, and you'll also see that on the expenditure side as well on the next slide. So for expenditures, we had a few more changes to the budget versus the proposed. And so one thing that we had to finalize is the raise structure and how we were putting that into departmental budgets, as well as the finalizing of employee allocations across certain funds. And so that was really just cleanup in the adopted budget. Through our appeals process, we received an appeal from the sheriff's office. And so as a result of that, we are reinstating 4 FTEs that were removed. We're also reinstating some grant reimbursable expenses that were removed. And we were also finalizing some other operating expenditures that we received additional information on in the general fund. We also received an appeal from the Public Health Department. And so at the end of their appeal, we settled on no change to the transfer amount of $500,000. They were able to make some really smart budget cuts in order to present a balanced budget in 2026. And so the plan is to watch their progress throughout the year, and we can contribute additional funds if needed. If it looks like they may be utilizing fund balance in 2026. We also added a $30,000 public health support for emergency winter shelter. We will be adding 1 FTE for a pest inspector to assist with Japanese beetle eradication efforts and other pest efforts that have really ramped up over the past couple of years. We have an allocation of PILT funds. And so PILT funds that we receive, we're going to be distributing a portion of that to various fire districts in 2026. We also included a consultant contract for our county administration department. We are increasing facilities budget for increased electric utility costs with the addition of the various community campuses over the past couple of years. It's clear that we had under budgeted for their utility costs in 2025. And so we're just adjusting 2026 budget to be more in line with what actuals are coming in at. And then the opioid settlement pass-through funding, as I mentioned, you see that on both the revenue and expenditure side of things. And then finally, the finalizing the capital fund budget, which, as you can see, there were some substantial changes between the proposed and adopted budget as we added in some of those rebudgets, which I'll talk about in another slide or two. Any questions about changes between the adopted and proposed budgets?
Questions?
I don't have any.
Okay.
None
I think we're
now.
good. Thank you.
So moving on to our authorized staffing level, what I have on the screen for you is really just the departments that are showing a change versus our last adopted staffing level. And then you can see the total county roll up at the bottom where it says all departments. And so we are seeing a 3% decrease in staffing level versus 2025. Some of the changes that you're seeing here is going to be just a reorganization of FTEs across several departments. Most notably is our natural resources department. We are moving our parks department out of our facilities department into natural resources. And then we're also moving our trails division into natural resources. So just some reorganization there. We're going to be adding 3 FTEs to our road and bridge team for preservation crew. And as I mentioned, we're also adding 1 FTE to natural resources for a pest investigator. And as I mentioned before, we have defunded a total of 50 positions through this budget process. And so in place of a hiring freeze next year, we were able to identify 37 positions for defunding and removing the FTE. 10 of those positions were the ones that were defunded through our voluntary staff reduction program that we did earlier in the year. And so those will be defunded for 2 years. However, the FTE is going to be retained on that so that when the 2 years is up, they can bring that position back on. And then we were able to defund an additional 3 positions. However, the FTE is retained right now as departments are working to procure supplemental funding for those positions. So any questions regarding changes in FTE?
None.
I have none right now.
We're good. Thank you, Diane.
So moving on to our capital improvement plan. This is a high level overview. of the capital fund budget for 2026. Total revenues on the left side of the screen, you can see are 47.2 million for 2026. That's going to be made up of mostly sales tax, about 36 million, as well as some other state and federal funding that we're receiving. Public Works has almost $7 million in funding coming in 2026 for various projects. Total expenditures, I did try to break it out to make it more intuitive for you. So in 2026, for those projects, we are budgeting $49.1 million, and then a little over 15 million is attributable to those 2025 rebudgets that I mentioned. And again, the use of fund balance is what we talked about, how the 2025 unused funds fall into fund balance, and then we reappropriate those in 2026 and then draw down those funds. So again, this one is also a balanced budget for 2026. And I just want to highlight some of the 2026 projects. So our IT has $2.5 million budgeted for software replacements, upgrades, and maintenance. Public Works, as I mentioned, has $7 million in revenues to support various projects. They have 27 million budgeted for road improvements and bridges and 4.5 million budgeted for annual surface treatments. Our facilities department has 3.7 million invested in upgrading our HVAC systems, 2 million in preserving our current assets, and then 1.7 million to go towards the Justice Center expansion project. And I did put on here details on what projects were being rebudgeted from 2025. So Public Works has a couple, Orchard Avenue, 32.5 Road, and 22.5 and Greenbelt. Facilities had 2.8 million that they were rebudgeting for that Justice Center expansion. And then our regional transportation planning office had some bus purchases that they weren't able to commit to a contract. And so they'll be doing that purchase in 2026 instead. And that is all that I have for you. The budget will be available on our website at the end of the week. And then in March, we do put together a pretty comprehensive online budget book. It's about 200 pages, so that'll be available in March for anyone who is interested in that. And I'm available to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. If there's any questions on these basically four proposals?
My comment or question would be when we look at the general budget versus the capital budget, just so the taxpayers understand, and I get a clear understanding that general is subject to Tabor caps, correct? And then capital, we don't have the Tabor restrictions.
So if you're talking about revenues, so the capital budget is mostly funded through sales tax. So yeah, there is no Tabor restrictions really surrounding the revenues that come into that fund. On the general fund, you do have the property tax, which is strictly Tabor limited in what we can collect, the growth and what we can collect year over year.
Okay.
I don't have questions right now.
Okay. I'm gonna open it up to the public. We're gonna, after we open up the public for all four items, we're gonna come back and consider each item independently, items 1 through 4, but after we open it up to the public. So if there's any public comments on these four resolutions this morning, now would be opportunity to speak. Okay. Don't everybody come down at once. Okay, seeing no public comment on these four resolutions, I'm going to bring it back to the board. And we're going to take these. Do you guys have any final comments on this budget before we start adopting these resolutions, or?
Again, going back to when we implemented and we sat down with our strategic plan and, you know, setting the priorities and what are the services that are most important for Mesa County and the accountability piece. In transparency, I think we've done an excellent job here today with proposing and putting together the finalized budget.
Yeah, I agree. I think our budget process is very transparent. I know I'm an office of one, but I'm also always available if there are questions from the public about the budget. But I do think we try to keep it as transparent as possible.
This is like your Super Bowl. you know, like it's the culmination of your year's worth of work.
You could call it that.
I do want to identify and be transparent about the fact that we are dipping into general fund balance this year. We did last year as well. And mainly that's because revenues are flat. We're still experiencing inflation and the results of inflation. So our expenses continue to go through the roof where our revenues are flat. So, but that's what fund balance is for. And we're hoping over the last year, this year, and maybe next year, those will balance out and we'll eventually begin to build that fund balance again, while continuing to serve the community as though they expect. You know, they expect the same services from the Department of Human Services, the sheriff, all those things. And we want to continue to provide that high level of service. So that's what our fund balance is for. So there is a recognition that we are absolutely dipping into our fund balance, but that we're committed to in the future growing that back to a healthy place so that when we're in this place in the future, we have a fund balance to lean against. So
Yeah, and I do want to add that we did try to make the reductions to the budget in good faith and make sure that we weren't reducing so much that it was affecting the operations of any of our departments. And I think we made some good reductions this year, and obviously we have more work next year and probably the year after that as we try to pull out of the structural deficit. But I do think that where we started 8 months ago with this budget, I think we're in a much better spot now.
And I think it does, to steal Commissioner Daniels' word, creative destruction. It does force us to kind of prioritize in these tougher years, which is not always a bad thing. So it's been a toughest budget year in my tenure, but it's really helped us prioritize, and really look to what's most meaningful and what the true proper role of government is, which again, when money's falling from the sky, it's easy to put a budget together. But in these years, it's a little more difficult, and really commend you guys for the job you've done. It's not easy, but appreciate all you've done. So any other comments? Go ahead.
I'll just add that I really appreciate our staff working so diligently through this process. We knew the economy was slowing down. We knew inflation was a pressure. We foresaw a lot of this happening. That's why we build up such a strong balance, and we plan for those rainy days. And this budget cycle was a rainy day, and we were in a really good position to be able to tackle this, and our staff did an exceptional job. And I just want to give out a shout out to our electeds who really made some sacrifices, and also our department heads made some major sacrifices. And I will say that we have time after this budget. We'll have a whole year next year where we'll be able to have supplemental budget requests as well. So if things come up, as they always do, as we've seen just this year, Mother Nature can be a serious beast between fires, Japanese beetle, it just happens. So you can't plan for everything, but I think this is why we save. This is why we're fiscally conservative in our county, and then we're able to adjust and pivot as we move forward. I know that our support for the sheriff's office was in the press a little bit, and I think that we've shown that we support our law enforcement in Mesa County, and we always have. And we passed our public safety tax in 2017. Public safety tax made it to their coffers in 2018. And since then, Mesa County General Fund has more than doubled for our sheriff's department. Their wages have more than doubled. And so it's working. Our community supports public safety, and we're here for our sheriff's department and public safety. And that public safety tax is really special because it goes towards municipalities. It goes towards our justice center, not the center that we're building, but the justice, the DA's office as well. So it's a real large theme, and there's no mandate on the spending out of the general fund, which is actually really nice because you can have that flexibility. So when sales tax had dipped, when we were dealing with COVID, we were able to supplement that shortfall a little bit and give them more and be really responsive. And I think our public really appreciates that responsiveness, that we don't have to have mandated spending out of the general fund. But again, we appreciate our law enforcement, and also public health has had a very difficult year, considering what's happening at the federal level and those adjustments that need to be made. And I just want to say, our public health team does a phenomenal job of responding to the community needs. And they have done an excellent job of keeping us informed in what's happening day in and day out. Some of their stories are really frightening. I don't know how you guys do what you do sometimes, but we're here to support you and really help you serve our community. And that's all of our department heads and our elected. So this definitely was not an easy budget, but I'm really proud of the work that we've done and the communication that we've done with the public. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Daniel. I'll now entertain a motion for item number 6.1. If you want to read it, I make a motion to approve a resolution summarizing blah, blah, blah. We'll go each item just like that.
Do you want me to read one?
Yeah, read one.
I move to pass a resolution summarizing expenditures and revenues for each fund and adopting the 2026 budget.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0.
I move number 2, a resolution appropriating sums of money for calendar year 2026.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. And these are as presented, of course, this morning. Go ahead, number 3.
Number 3, I move to pass a resolution levying general property taxes for the year 2025.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. And finally, number 4.
I move to pass number 4, a resolution to adopt authorized staffing levels for the year 2026.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0.